My name is Elena, and I was 27 years old when my sister got married. The same year, I finally believed I had my life under control. I worked in finance, rented a small but clean apartment on my own, and had spent nearly 5 years building a savings account that no one helped me with. That money wasn't for luxury. It was for a down payment, for stability, for proof that I didn't need to depend on anyone anymore, especially not my parents. Growing up, I was always the other child, the practical one, the quiet one, the one who understood when things went to my sister instead. She was emotional, sensitive, needed more support. I was told I was strong, so strong, in fact, that no one ever asked what it cost me. When my parents announced my sister's engagement, the family reacted exactly as expected. Group chats exploded, plans formed overnight, venues were toured, dresses were discussed. I wasn't part of any of it. I didn't help choose flowers. I wasn't asked about dates. I didn't even know the venue until the invitation arrived. And when it did, something felt off. The envelope was thin, no note inside, just a printed card with the ceremony time and location. No mention of family roles, no bridesmaid duties, no rehearsal dinner. I told myself not to overthink it. My parents had mentioned multiple times that money was tight, that they were stretching every dollar to give my sister a modest wedding. My mother sighed whenever the topic came up. My father joked about selling his car, so I assumed that was why I was kept out of the planning. Less involvement, less expense, less complication. 2 months before the wedding, something else happened. I checked my savings account one night and noticed a large transfer, $18,000, missing. At first, I thought it was a banking error. I refreshed the page, checked again. The transaction showed a transfer to an account I recognized immediately, my parents. When I called, my mom sounded calm, too calm. "Oh, that," she said. "Don't worry, it's temporary. Your dad moved it by accident while fixing something. We'll move it back." I asked why they had access to my account in the first place. A pause. "Well, you gave us permission years ago," she said, "for emergencies." I didn't remember doing that, but I was tired, busy, and conditioned not to push. I told myself it would be resolved. The wedding was 3 weeks later. I arrived alone, wearing a dress I already owned and carrying a gift envelope I'd carefully budgeted for. The venue took my breath away. It wasn't modest. It wasn't simple. It was stunning. A lakeside estate, valet parking, live string music floating through the air. Everything looked curated, expensive, intentional. I stood there for a moment, scanning the scene, my stomach tightening. This didn't match the story I'd been told. Inside, the ceremony was flawless. White roses, custom programs, professional videographers. My parents sat proudly in the front row, my sister radiant beside them. I watched from a few rows back, clapping when everyone else did, smiling when the room smiled. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception hall. That's when I saw the seating chart. I traced my finger down the list, passing family names, cousins, friends, front tables, center tables. Then, near the bottom, in smaller font, Elena, courtesy guest. My table was at the far back of the room, near the service door, half hidden behind a column. Not with family, not even with extended relatives. Just there. I stood still, heat rising to my face, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes get apologized for. This was placement. I took my seat quietly, telling myself I wouldn't ruin my sister's day over something petty. But as I looked around the room, at the band setting up, the open bar gleaming, the decor that screamed money, I felt a cold realization begin to form. Something didn't add up, and whatever it was, it had my name written all over it, even if they'd tried to seat me far enough back that no one would notice. I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress the way people do when they're trying to keep their composure intact. From my table, I had a clear view of everything: and no one had a clear view of me. The dance floor glowed under soft lights. The head table sat elevated, framed by flowers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My parents were laughing, leaning toward relatives, telling stories with the relaxed confidence of people who believed they were exactly where they belonged. No one looked back. A waiter passed and asked if I wanted champagne. I nodded, mostly so my hands would have something to do. As I lifted the glass, I caught fragments of conversation drifting from nearby tables. Can you believe how elegant this turned out? They really spared no expense. Your parents must be so proud. Proud. I took a sip and let the words sit there, heavy and bitter. Someone from my sister's side, an old friend I barely recognized, approached our table and smiled politely. Hi, she said. I don't think we've met. Are you with the groom's coworkers? I hesitated for half a second, just long enough to feel the familiar instinct to make things easier for everyone else. No, I said. I'm the bride's sister. Her smile flickered. Not dramatically, just enough to register surprise. Oh, she said again. Then, after a pause, that's nice. She walked away before I could respond. I stared at my place setting, my name printed neatly on a small white card. Same font as everyone else. Same paper. Different message. Courtesy guest. I told myself not to spiral. Weddings are complicated. People get shuffled. Someone probably thought this was practical. But practicality didn't explain why every cousin, every distant relative I'd seen once every few years, had a better seat than I did. Practicality didn't explain why my parents hadn't noticed. Or if they had, why they hadn't said anything. The band started playing. My sister and her new husband took the floor for their first dance. Applause filled the room. Phones came out. People stood to get better angles. I stayed seated, not because I didn't want to watch, but because I realized something unsettling. If I stood, I'd block the exit. That was where they'd put me, near the door. Easy to overlook, easy to leave. As dinner was served, the extravagance became impossible to ignore. Multiple courses, custom menus, a dessert table that looked like something from a magazine spread. This was not the wedding my parents had described. I thought back to the conversations over the past year. My mom sighing about costs. My dad mentioning how they were cutting corners, the way they'd brushed off my questions with jokes and vague reassurances. And then I thought about my savings account. About the night I'd noticed the missing money, about how quickly my mom had dismissed it, about how I'd chosen not to push, not because it made sense, but because pushing had never gone well for me in this family. A cousin I trusted slid into the chair beside me, balancing a plate. Hey, she said quietly, can I ask you something kind of awkward? Sure. She glanced toward the head table, then back at me. Your parents said you helped pay for this. That was really generous. The room didn't go quiet. The music didn't stop. No one turned to look, but inside me, something locked into place. I didn't, I said. She frowned. Really? They mentioned your contribution. Said you didn't want any recognition. I felt my pulse in my ears. They said that? She nodded, confused. Yeah. I thought that's why you were keeping a low profile. Low profile. That was one way to describe it. Another waiter passed, refilling glasses. Laughter swelled as someone clinked a fork against a glass to start a toast. I watched my parents stand, watched my father straighten his jacket, watched my mother smile the way she did when she was about to tell a story she'd rehearsed. And suddenly, the seating chart made sense. They hadn't put me in the back by accident. They'd put me there because it's easier to take from someone when they're out of the frame. Easier to claim generosity when the person who paid the price isn't close enough to contradict it. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I just sat there, listening to a speech about love, family, and sacrifice, paid for with money I'd never agreed to give. And for the first time that night, I wasn't embarrassed about where I was seated. I was angry, because now I knew the truth. And they had no idea how expensive that truth was about to become. Once the idea settled in my mind, it refused to stay quiet. I tried to enjoy the reception the way everyone else did. I really did. I laughed at the right moments, clapped after the speeches, smiled when my sister came by briefly to hug me and say, "I'm glad you made it." She didn't mention the seating. She didn't mention the money. She smelled like champagne and relief. But my eyes kept drifting back to the details. The kind of details you notice when you work with numbers for a living. The band wasn't local. I recognized the name from a corporate event I'd helped budget for the year before. They were expensive. The lighting wasn't standard venue lighting either. It was a full setup, programmed to change with the music. The bar didn't just serve wine and beer. It had premium labels, custom cocktails, a dedicated bartender for whiskey alone. This wasn't a wedding that had been scraped together. This was a wedding that had been financed. I remembered how, a few months earlier, my mother had sighed over the phone and said, "We're doing everything as simply as possible. Your sister understands. She's not asking for much." I remembered my father telling me they dipped into their retirement a little, but that it was nothing serious. I remembered the missing $18,000. At the time, I'd accepted their explanation because accepting it was easier than opening a conversation I already knew would turn into guilt, defensiveness, and accusations of being ungrateful. Sitting there now, I realized that ease had cost me something. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms just to breathe. The music muffled behind me, replaced by quieter echoes and the hum of air conditioning. I leaned against the wall and pulled out my phone. I checked my bank app again, even though I already knew what I'd see. The transfer was still there, labeled, dated, clear. I opened my messages with my mom and scrolled back to the night I'd asked about it. "It's temporary. We'll fix it. Don't stress." No follow-up, no confirmation, no return. I locked my phone and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked composed, put together, like someone who belonged at a table much closer to the center of the room. That was the part that stung the most. They hadn't treated me like someone who couldn't contribute. They'd treated me like someone who would, and then stay quiet about it. When I went back inside, the speeches were ending. My father raised his glass and talked about family, about sacrifice, about how everyone came together to make this day possible. People nodded. Some glanced in my direction with polite smiles. I wondered how many of them believed I'd chosen anonymity. How many thought I was humble? How many would have looked at me differently if they'd known the truth? That I was seated at the back, not because I didn't matter, but because I mattered too much. I caught my mother's eye across the room. For a split second, something flickered there. Recognition, calculation, maybe even fear. Then she smiled and turned away. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a decision. They had taken my savings without asking, used it to fund a celebration that elevated one child while quietly diminishing the other, and trusted that I wouldn't disrupt the image. They trusted my silence. The realization didn't make me shaky. It made me calm, because once you see the full picture, you stop guessing. I went back to my table and sat down, letting the noise wash over me. I didn't plan a confrontation that night. I didn't want a scene. Not at my sister's wedding. Not in front of people who didn't deserve to be pulled into it. But I made a promise to myself as I watched the party continue. I would not leave this unaddressed. They could have their perfect reception, but when the music stopped, when the guests went home, when the photos were posted and the story was told, I was going to ask a question they hadn't prepared an answer for. And this time, I wouldn't accept temporary as an explanation. I didn't confront anyone that night. That surprised even me. I stayed until the cake was cut, until the dance floor thinned out and heels were kicked off under tables. I hugged my sister goodbye, told her she looked happy, and meant it. Whatever my parents had done, it wasn't her fault. Not entirely. She had grown up in the same system I had. She'd just been rewarded by it instead of drained. On the drive home, the anger didn't explode. It condensed. That's always how it happens with me. First the facts line up, then the emotions follow. The next morning, my phone buzzed with wedding photos already circulating in the family group chat. Smiling faces, perfect angles, a caption from my mom. So grateful our family came together to make this day possible. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Our family. Not we. Not your father and I. Not we worked extra hours. Our family. I replied to nothing. Instead, I called my bank. I asked for a detailed transaction history, dates, authorizations, access logs. I asked when my parents had last used their credentials to move money out of my account. The answer was calm and precise. 3 months earlier, initiated from a device registered to my father, using permissions that had not been updated in over 10 years. 10 years. Back when I was still a student. Back when I trusted them with everything because I didn't know any better. That afternoon, my aunt called. Not the cousin from the wedding, the one who'd made the comment, but my mother's older sister. The one who never chose sides loudly but always noticed patterns. "I need to ask you something," she said carefully. "Your parents told me you helped pay for the reception." I didn't interrupt her. "They said you insisted on staying out of the spotlight," she continued. "That you didn't want anyone making a big deal out of it." I exhaled slowly. "That's not true." Silence. "I didn't agree to pay for anything," I said. "They took money from my savings without asking." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes." She didn't argue. She didn't defend them. She didn't soften it. She just said, "I thought so." That was the moment everything shifted, because it meant I wasn't the only one who'd noticed how clean the story sounded, and how little sense it made. By evening, the calls started coming in from other relatives, casual at first, then more pointed. "How did your parents manage the budget? Did you really help out? Were you okay with how everything was handled?" I answered honestly, briefly, the same way every time. "I didn't consent. I wasn't informed. I'm dealing with it privately." My parents noticed the change before I ever spoke to them directly. My mother called that night, her voice tight and overly cheerful. "People are asking questions," she said. "I know," I replied. "You don't need to say anything," she added quickly. "It was a misunderstanding. We were going to talk to you." "When?" I asked. Another pause. "You know how busy things were," she said. "The wedding, the planning." "You took the money 3 months ago," I said. "The wedding was last weekend." Her tone shifted then. Just slightly, enough to reveal irritation underneath. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said. "It was for your sister. That doesn't give you the right to take it." "We're your parents," she snapped. "Families help each other." "Families ask," I said. "They don't hide it and call it generosity later." Her breath caught, not with guilt, with anger. "You could have sat closer if you wanted recognition," she said. That sentence told me everything. The seating wasn't an accident. It was strategy. They didn't want me near the center because the closer I was, the harder it would be to explain why the person who paid wasn't being acknowledged or consulted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of theft. I didn't threaten anything. I just said, "I want the money back." She laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "We don't have it," she said. "It's already spent." "I know," I replied. "I was there." The line went quiet. And in that silence, I realized something that made my chest feel strangely light. They had already taken what they could. What they hadn't prepared for was what would happen once I stopped protecting the version of them they'd been living off of. The wedding was over. The story was circulating. And now, the truth had a seat at the table, whether they liked it or not. We didn't speak for 3 days after that call. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. The kind meant to make the other person uncomfortable enough to back down. I didn't. Instead, I gathered everything. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, the dates, screenshots of messages where my mother had called it temporary. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for clarity. On the 4th day, my father called. Not my mother. That alone told me they were recalculating. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was steady, measured. The same tone he used when I was younger, and he wanted to sound reasonable while still being in control. "I agree," I said, "but I'm not coming over." A pause. "Then where?" "Here," I replied. "My place." Another pause. Longer. They arrived that evening, both of them, sitting stiffly on my couch like guests who didn't quite know the rules of the house. My mother looked tired, but not remorseful. My father avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the framed photos on my wall. Pictures from trips I'd paid for myself, moments I'd built without them. I didn't offer drinks. I didn't sit down right away. "I want to understand something," I said, standing across from them. "When were you planning to tell me you used my savings?" My father cleared his throat. "We assumed you knew." "No," I said calmly. "You assumed I wouldn't push." My mother crossed her arms. "You're overreacting. It was for your sister's wedding." "That's not an answer," I replied. "I asked when." She looked at my father. He didn't speak. "So there was no plan," I continued. "You took the money, spent it, told people I contributed willingly, and seated me at the back so I wouldn't complicate the story." My mother scoffed. "You're reading too much into everything." "Then explain the seating," I said. "Explain why I was labeled a courtesy guest." Her mouth opened, then closed. My father finally spoke. "We didn't want attention drawn to finances, because it would expose the truth," I said. Silence filled the room, not awkward, not heated, just heavy. "I want the money returned," I said again. "Not because I need it right now, but because you took it without permission." My mother's voice sharpened. "We don't have it. And even if we did, it went to your sister. Are you really going to take that away from her?" I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything from her. I'm holding you accountable." She leaned forward. "You're choosing money over family." I met her eyes. "No, you did. When you decided I was easier to take from than to ask." That landed. My father looked at the floor. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a version of me she hadn't anticipated. One that wasn't apologizing, wasn't shrinking, wasn't trying to keep things smooth. "This isn't how families work," she said quietly. "You're right," I replied. "Healthy ones don't." They left without an agreement. No repayment plan. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a clear understanding that I wouldn't quietly absorb this anymore. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Mom said you're upset about the wedding money. I didn't know it came from you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "I believe you, but now you know why I'm stepping back." She didn't reply. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how steady I felt. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to negotiate my place in the family. I was defining my boundaries and letting the consequences fall where they belonged. And that was something no seating chart could ever take away. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A missed call from my aunt, a carefully worded text from a cousin asking if I was doing okay, a sudden shift in tone from people who had always accepted my parents' version of events without question. That was how I knew the story had started to change. Not because my parents admitted anything, but because silence no longer worked. A week after our conversation, I was added to a family group chat I hadn't heard from in months. The message from my mother was short, almost casual. "We're going through a misunderstanding right now. Please give us time." A misunderstanding. That word again. I didn't respond, but my aunt did. "What misunderstanding? You told everyone the wedding was fully paid for. Now people are saying money was taken from her savings?" 3 dots appeared under my mother's name, then disappeared. My phone rang an hour later. "Unknown number." I answered. It was my uncle, the one who used to praise my parents for raising such a responsible child. "I didn't know," he said, skipping pleasantries. "About the money." "I know," I replied. "You weren't supposed to." He sighed. "Your mother says you're exaggerating." I let a beat pass. "Did she show you the bank transfers?" Silence. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. More calls followed over the next few days. None of them angry, none defensive, just confused. People trying to reconcile the image they'd been given with details that no longer fit. And slowly, painfully, the truth took shape. That I hadn't distanced myself from the family, that I hadn't become cold or selfish, that the reason I'd stopped attending events wasn't pride, it was exhaustion. Because it's hard to keep smiling for people who keep rewriting your role in their story. My parents didn't call again. Instead, they let the narrative drift, hoping time would blur it, hoping people would lose interest. But something had shifted. At the next family gathering, I didn't attend. Neither did my sister. That part surprised me. She called me late one night, her voice low. "I didn't know they took your money," she said. "I swear, I thought it was theirs." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. "But now they're saying you're trying to turn everyone against them." I exhaled slowly. I didn't say anything to turn people. I just stopped lying. She didn't argue. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "That makes two of us," I replied gently. "But I do know this. I'm not going to cover for them anymore." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't think they expected you to push back." "They never do," I said. "Not when someone's been quiet for too long." After that, the calls stopped. Not because things were resolved, but because control had slipped out of their hands. And control, once questioned, doesn't come back easily. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, because I finally understood something that took me years to learn. Staying silent to protect the family image doesn't make you loyal. It makes you invisible. And I was done disappearing. The next time my parents spoke about me, it wasn't with certainty. It was with caution. And that was the real consequence they never planned for. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic apology, no tearful reunion, no moment where everyone suddenly agreed on what had happened. Real endings rarely work like that. The last update I heard came through someone else. My aunt mentioned it casually during a phone call, like she wasn't sure whether it mattered anymore. "Your parents had to take out a loan," she said. "The wedding costs, plus some other things. They're stressed." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. A few months later, I saw photos online. Another family event. Smaller this time. Fewer smiles. My parents were still there. Still together. Still presenting the same version of themselves. But something was different. They weren't at the center anymore. People didn't orbit them the way they used to. Conversations shifted when they joined. Questions lingered too long in the air. Not accusations, just doubt. And doubt is harder to fight than anger. My relationship with my sister settled into something careful but honest. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We didn't relive it either. We talked about work, about normal things, about how strange it felt to realize your parents weren't who you thought they were. That kind of realization doesn't break you all at once. It just rearranges everything quietly. As for me, I moved forward. I rebuilt my savings. I closed the accounts they once had access to. I stopped explaining myself to people who only wanted a simpler story. At the next reunion, I showed up on my own terms. No back table, no courtesy label, no role assigned to keep things comfortable. Some relatives hugged me tighter than before. Others avoided eye contact. My parents nodded politely, like acquaintances who hadn't figured out the new boundaries yet. And that was fine, because I wasn't there to reclaim my place. I had already built one elsewhere. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about the version of me they'd depended on, the one who paid quietly, endured quietly, disappeared quietly. That version didn't exist anymore, not because I became cruel, but because I finally chose honesty over harmony. They took my savings without asking. They took my silence for granted. They took my seat at the table because they thought I'd never stand up. What they didn't realize was this: you can take someone's money. You can take their credit. You can even take their place in the room. But once the truth steps into the light, you don't get to decide where it sits anymore.